You may have seen this instrument many times before on video games, period movies, Baroque paintings, cosplay events, concert halls or fantasy books, and not even know its name. You probably think that it's a medieval instrument, an Arabic instrument, or that it's the ancestral of the modern guitar. But are these conceptions really true? Where does it come from? What does it sound like? What kind of music does it play? Does anyone actually play this instrument? Can you, for example, play and study the lute if you want to? The word lute usually refers to two visually similar but very different kinds of instruments. On one side we have the different types of European lutes that were very popular from the late Middle Ages to the late Baroque, and on the other side we have the Eastern lutes, which are also called by the Arabic word oud, which include Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and many other regional variations of the instrument. These lutes on their part continued pretty much in vogue in the everyday popular music of these regions through millennia, so they continued to adapt and be modernized through the ages. It's funny because the Western words lute, liuto, laoud, lauten, and alaoudi all come from the Arabic alud, which simply means the oud. So every time we say the lute, we are actually saying the oud. The European lutes are meant for harmonic accompaniment and for polyphonic solo, so they are played with the bare fingers, they have frets, and they have a type of tuning that helps making chord shapes easier. While the ouds in turn have a mostly melodic function, so they are played with a plectrum that allows for very fast and clear melodies. They also have no frets, so they can play the microtones and slurs that are so typical of the Middle Eastern maqam style. So now you see that even though they kind of look the same, these two families of lute are completely different beasts. Someone who plays one of them does not necessarily play the other. But of course that this family resemblance comes from a common ancestry. The Persian barbat gave origin to the Arabic oud of the early Middle Ages that expanded throughout the Islamic Empire and eventually into the European continent. As you may know, the Iberian Peninsula was partially under Islamic rule from the 8th to the 15th century, and this led to a huge Arabic and Maghrebin influence on the region, also in Europe as a whole. For example, the vast majority of the modern traditional Western orchestra is actually composed by instruments that in one way or another have its origins traced back to Eastern instruments that were brought to the West during the Middle Ages. Once in Europe, the lute of course shifted and adapted to the local musical culture. At first, in the Middle Ages, it kind of remained in the shadow of more popular instruments such as the citole and the guitar, which, by the way, developed in parallel to the lute and gave rise to the early and modern guitars. So the guitar is not usually regarded as a direct descendant of the lute. If you enjoyed the video so far, don't forget to like and please consider supporting the channel. These medieval instruments were played with a plectrum, just like the oud, which suited very well the mostly monophonic medieval music. But as polyphony grew more and more popular in the 15th century, the lute players developed a new finger style, which allowed for multiple fingers to play multiple melodies. And because of that, by the 16th century, the lute became the most prestigious instrument of the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, most of the music was written for 3 to 5 voices of different pitches, which were not regarded as chord progressions, but rather as really independent voices that sounded nice together but were really on their own. These different melodies were most typically sung or played by a group of instruments such as a recorder or viol concert. But instruments such as the lute and the harpsichord could actually play all alone all of the voices of the polyphony, so they were very useful for composing and for solo chamber performances. Also, they could serve as accompaniment by taking the remaining voices while a singer or a melodic instrument played one of the voices of the polyphony as a main part.
Since speech is fled, and tears and sighs and groans, my weary days, my weary days.
This gave rise to the monodic style, which would rule the musical thought of the Baroque during the 17th and the first half of the 18th century. In this new texture, we had one main melody that was to be sung or played by a high-pitched melodic instrument that was to be accompanied by what we call Basso Continuo, or double bass, which is basically one beautiful and strong written bass melody that came together with a sequence of chords that was more or less improvised according to the bass. This huge importance of the bass melody, inseparable from chords, led to the invention of lutes with a whole new set of bass strings that extended its register in a whole octave. These were the Baroque lute, the arch lute, and the theorbo. So, throughout this whole period, the lute was an extremely versatile instrument, serving not only as accompaniment, but also having an amazing solo repertoire on its own right. But unfortunately, by the end of the 18th century, the reign of the lute came to a twilight. The lute was mostly forgotten alongside other Baroque instruments such as the viol and the harpsichord that were taken as symbols of an oppressive aristocratic past and not anymore welcome at the new, rational and enlightened age of the bourgeoisie. But during the 20th century, a lot of people got bored with traditional classical music or even disenchanted by what it represented after the horrors of World War II. So some people looked to the future and started to compose and play experimental contemporary music, while others looked to the past and started to research and perform music of the Baroque, Renaissance, and medieval periods. And here we are! Today the lute is a regular part of the Western concert music culture, and just like the guitar or the piano or the violin, you can actually study and play the lute in music schools or with independent teachers. I will do a Q&A follow-up video, so please let me know in the comments if you have any questions.